The Story of Celest by Ana Clara Sofronie and Călin Dan Moroșan. Chapter 2, read by Alexandra Bumbu. One Saturday night, 3 apparently unrelated events unfolded. First, Celeste, usually guarding Jimmy's skylight in the form of a blue ball, started stretching straight towards the sky, slowly turning purple. Second, Jimmy had an awful nightmare. He dreamt of huge red scissors cutting Celeste to pieces, which scattered all over his backyard. He woke up very hot and sweaty. Third, Professor Hopf, frantically searching through a pile of papers in the main room of the National Observatory, uttered to himself, "This is impossible. Unless... it must be here somewhere. I wrote the equations myself." Interestingly enough, the 3 events were related. Shortly after meeting Celeste, Jimmy visited the National Observatory with his class. There, Professor Hopf was volunteering to introduce young students to the magical world of stars. He took the time to answer all the mostly innocent questions that the students came up with. This funny-looking, rather overweight astrophysicist was a well-known scientist. He was especially famous for his revolutionary ideas about parallel universes, big bangs, and black holes. With his big curly blonde beard, thick glasses, and a heavy breathing, he seemed much older than he actually was. While he was very nice to the children visiting the observatory, very few people wanted to be involved in his research because of his stubbornness in the lab. At the National Observatory, he was in charge of exotic space phenomena. They were anomalies in the signals detected from the sky that could not be interpreted by computers. Nobody wanted to go through the messy data, and most researchers believed that the anomalies were simply glitches affecting the telescopes. But not Professor Hopf. This is why he preferred to spend his weekends in the lab, taking advantage of the quiet to concentrate on the strange signals from space. During his class visit to the observatory, Jimmy asked a question that made Professor Hopf raise his eyebrows. Could it be that a black hole is actually a tunnel to another parallel universe? Well, the answer to this question requires more knowledge than you are allowed to have, joked the professor, avoiding a direct answer. "Why don't you come to the lab this Saturday?" asked Professor Hopf, partly because he felt guilty and partly because he liked Jimmy. "I'll have time to help you understand parallel universes, and you'll have the opportunity to ask more questions." The truth is, Professor Hopf often felt lonely during his weekends at the lab, and he needed someone to listen to his theories. Jimmy proved to be more than a good listener, inciting Professor Hopf to endless monologues. This is how Jimmy learned about a very strange phenomenon that recently baffled the professor. "Jimmy, watch this constellation. It's called Aquila, or the Flying Eagle. Do you see anything in the middle?" "No," replied Jimmy, while looking as carefully as possible through the lenses of the most powerful telescope in the country. "See?" "No," Jimmy replied again. "Don't interrupt me," said the professor. "See, you can't see anything because a black hole just appeared, and black holes do not appear overnight. And it seems to be much closer than it should be. And it emits very strange bursts of radiation. And I wonder how many more ands I can come up with just to challenge my neurons and your patience with me," said Professor Hopf with a big smile on his face. "Don't worry, young man. Everything has an explanation. We just need to keep our eyes open for it." Though neither of them said it out loud, both thought that a tunnel between 2 parallel universes could be that explanation. "What kind of radiation bursts?" dared Jimmy. "Glad you asked. There are 2 types, both never seen before. One is directed straight at us, which shows that the black hole is slowly but surely moving towards Earth. The second type indicates that the hole is rotating faster and faster while increasing its radius. Why is it coming towards us and who rotates it? A total mystery, and nobody else in the lab would look into it. Just my old brain, and your young curiosity," explained Professor Hopf. This last tirade did not enlighten Jimmy at all, and left the professor silent, a sign that he wished to be alone. Jimmy's nightmare made him jump out of bed, landing directly under the skylight. Looking up, he saw Celeste stretching like a laser beam towards space. Celeste's stretched-out body was shaken by small vibrations coming to and from space. Jimmy felt an instinctive fear that something bad was happening, but he could not tell what it was. Looking through his telescope, he tried to follow the moving end of Celeste into the sky. What he saw made him turn pale. Celeste was heading towards the summer triangle, formed by 3 stars: Vega in the Lyra constellation, Deneb in Cygnus, and Altair in the Aquila constellation. Aquila. It cannot be. This is where the strange black hole appeared, exclaimed Jimmy. Why is Celeste attracted to it? And why is he changing colors? I have to see Professor Hopf as soon as possible. Jimmy quickly changed out of his pajamas, threw the telescope in his backpack, and opened the skylight. He climbed onto the roof and quietly slid to the garage, then jumped down on the sidewalk. He listened for a while to see if his father woke up. Not hearing anything, he took his bike and started pedaling uphill towards the observatory, which was dominating that part of the city. Celeste closely followed Jimmy with his tail left on Earth, which was vibrating more and more intensely, and starting to now change colors from purple to red. It took Jimmy no more than half an hour to get to the observatory gate. The security guard was watching a late football game with his feet on his desk, fighting to keep his eyes open. Jimmy left his bike out of sight and sneaked through the gate, crouching under the security booth window. He then ran fast towards the main laboratory. Inside, he found a very agitated Professor Hopf. The professor seemed to be analyzing data on a monitor and was filling a whiteboard with strange symbols and drawings. "What on earth are you doing here in the middle of the night?" asked the professor. "Does your father know you're here? And how did you make it past security?" "Professor Hopf, there's something happening in the Aquila constellation," spluttered Jimmy. "I'm aware of the weird things happening in the Aquila constellation, but it does not concern you at all. You should be in bed, and I should concentrate on this crazy phenomenon. I mean it," said the professor, his red eyes staring at Jimmy from behind his glasses. Poor Jimmy was having a hard time. Celeste's continuous stretching made him feel sicker and sicker. He swore not to tell anyone about his friend with strange powers, but he could not see any other option. He started telling Professor Hopf the whole story, his words spewing out of his mouth like from a machine gun. He recounted everything from the very first day he met Celeste up to the last minute. As Jimmy's story unfolded, Professor Hopf became more and more perplexed. He wondered if Jimmy was just raving from having a fever. But Jimmy was speaking so fast and so convincingly that Professor Hopf did not have a choice but to let him finish, listening more and more carefully as the story came to an end. "Show me a single proof and I will believe you," said the professor, hoping to dismiss this unbelievable story. "Outside," whispered Jimmy, heading out through the back door. "Now push me," added Jimmy. Professor Hopf gave Jimmy a light push with one hand. 1 second later, he was lying down on a pile of garbage several steps away, wondering what hit his chest so hard while trying to regain his breath. "Wow, Jimmy, what was that?" "A gentle push from Celeste," said Jimmy. He then started shaking as Celeste's vibration became even stronger. "Please, Professor, we have to do something. A strange force is taking Celeste away, and I can feel that he's in big danger. Before taking any action, we have to understand what is happening," said Professor Hopf after calming down a little. "Let's go inside. We might just find something," he added. Exotic forms of matter were no stranger to Professor Hopf, but whatever his imagination could produce up to now was no match for Celeste. His mind was desperately searching for answers to a dozen questions that were popping up. At the same time, Jimmy was visibly sick, so it was very important for the professor to concentrate on how to handle the situation. "This is way too complicated to develop a theory right now," said Professor Hopf. "Let's simplify and gather the facts. Such a large form of energy could not be attracted by something else than a similar form with somehow opposite properties." "Like antimatter," followed Jimmy. "Exactly," confirmed the professor. "And because he is heading towards the black hole, it means that whatever attracts him is inside. And because this anti-whatever is very powerful, it can rotate the hole from the inside, creating an actual vortex in space. This vortex might very well connect to another universe, creating only the impression that the black hole is in our universe," concluded Professor Hopf, very proud of his logical explanation and how all the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit so well. "An anti-twin brother," whispered Jimmy. "This is why he's fighting so hard. If we don't do something, he'll be annihilated soon," added Jimmy. He then fainted on the lab floor. A child lying unconscious on the floor of the observatory lab in the middle of the night was the last thing that Professor Hopf needed. As all things in space come in pairs, so did Celeste. The moment that the first Big Bang produced this unique form of matter, its antimatter pair was expelled in the opposite direction. Torque had a very different behavior and evolution than his twin brother Celeste. Greedy, eager to destroy and eat all forms of matter, he started collapsing unto himself after ingurgitating several early formed galaxies. After a while, this created a huge black hole, the biggest ever, attracting more and more stars and planets into it. Its force of attraction was so great that Torque got trapped inside, becoming a prisoner of his own creation. Captivity made his anger grow more and more, and he never gave up on the idea of escaping. The stars and planets captured inside the black hole also brought with them an enormous amount of energy. Torque started using this energy to rotate the hole from the inside. This rotation enlarged the inner dense sphere, eventually reaching a point where the inward attraction started to diminish. It was his only chance of escaping from his prison. Such a large amount of matter rotating in space created a vortex which could connect universes. This happened around the time that Celeste and Jimmy met. Moreover, Torque felt the presence of Celeste nearby, making him even angrier. He sped up the rotation, creating the bursts of radiation that puzzled Professor Hopf. His goal was to attract Celeste in this trap and annihilate him before escaping from the black hole. Celeste felt torn between two very different worlds. One was the planet on which he was having so much fun with Jimmy. The other was a dark space in which his past was attracting him towards fight and perdition. Unable to choose, he decided to stretch as much as he could to keep in touch with both worlds. This diminished his power and ability to confront his twin brother. It was also clearly a lost battle. Celeste's first touch with Torque produced an immense ball of fire and light. The resulting radiation totally reset all the computers in the observatory lab, signaling to Professor Hopf that the situation was desperate. While imprisoned by the black hole, Torque had gathered a considerable amount of energy from all the matter captured within. His first encounter with his twin brother did not affect him much, but for Celeste, it was disastrous, almost cutting his strength in half. Even though Torque was losing energy for each rotation of the hole, at this rhythm, Celeste would not survive for long. The second clash produced an even bigger explosion. Beams of light could now be seen from Earth with the naked eye. Celeste's tail was reduced to a very thin tether, which now turned to white. He had almost lost all his energy, but was willing to fight until the end. All this happened very fast, right under the hopeless eyes of Professor Hopf. "Jimmy, wake up! Wake up! There's no time for fainting," shouted the professor while shaking Jimmy. Celeste lost almost all of his energy, but I think I found a solution. There's a very small chance it'll work, but we have to try it out, and I need your help. Hearing that Celeste might be saved made Jimmy jump to his feet. He yelled to the professor, "Hurry up! I feel that I'm losing him." "Come after me," said Professor Hopf, already running towards the back door of the lab. The portly professor jumped over garbage bags like a grizzly bear, with Jimmy barely keeping up behind him. It was a funny sight. On the security feed, the guards saw Professor Hopf's silhouette passing through the black gate in a hurry. The professor must be very hungry if he's running and taking a shortcut to his home, the security guard said to himself. Now I have to go and close the back gate myself. Scientists, what do you expect? For the second time that night, Jimmy went unnoticed. As the professor was passing over the hill, his breath became heavier. The truth is that the Professor Hopf never ran in his life. Even as a child, he avoided any form of physical exercise. Now, he was struggling to reach the other side of the hill. He suddenly collapsed, desperately looking back towards Jimmy. "Professor Hopf, I'm here. Are you feeling all right?" asked Jimmy, really scared. "Obviously, running is not my thing," joked the professor. But his face could not hide a grimace in the light of the full moon. "You'll have to do this alone." "What should I do?" asked Jimmy. "Run as fast as you can to the other side of the hill, where the power lines cross at a small channel. You'll have to pass under the lines, such that Celeste's tail, which is hopefully still following you, will come into contact with the wires. The wires are part of the national power grid and connect all the power plants and cities of the country. If we are lucky, there should be enough energy for Celeste to survive. Now hurry up. I'll catch up later if my heart doesn't give out." Jimmy did not waste a second. He started running like crazy with only one thought in mind, saving Celeste. He fell down several times, ripping his jeans and scraping his knee, but nothing could deter him from his goal. Contrary to Professor Hopf, he seemed to gain more and more energy with every step. Jimmy jumped over the small channel with ease and passed under the power lines, looking up to make sure that his best friend was still alive and following. Celeste's tail, now barely visible, appeared intermittently. Sparks of light moved through it, an indicator of the fierce battle he was facing in space. With one final effort, Jimmy crossed the road under the power lines. The first touch between Celeste's tail and the thick wires produced a thunderbolt that violently threw Jimmy to the ground. In a matter of seconds, electricity from all the power plants in the country was surging through Celeste's tail into space, sending all cities, one by one, into the dark. It did not take long for Celeste to drain out all the power plants, effectively shutting down the national grid. Soon, a dark silence covered the hill. Jimmy and Professor Hopf were left lying in the grass a few 100 meters apart under the light of the full moon. The next day, the news was abounding with contradictory information about last night's events. Some witnesses said that they saw meteorites falling on the city, whereas others sustained that they saw ball lightning over the observatory hill. But the sudden shutdown of the power grid created a big mess, big enough to distract people from these strange phenomena. "Celeste, where are you? You must fight. Don't give up." The nurse kept hearing Jimmy utter those phrases as he was lying on the hospital bed that Sunday morning. "He's raving again," said the nurse to the doctor who had just entered the room. "I wonder who Celeste is and why Jimmy is so worried." "He suffered a severe electrical shock. His brain still needs time to recover," said the doctor. "But he is young. I'm confident that he will come around." "Did you manage to contact his father?" the doctor asked the nurse. Yes, she answered. He should be coming soon. In the meantime, Professor Hopf, who brought him here, insists on seeing him. He's been waiting in the hallway all morning. Should I let him in? Asked the nurse. Maybe it's not a bad idea, replied the doctor. It might trigger the patient's brain to return to the real world quicker. Professor Hopf slowly entered the room and grabbed the chair. He seemed prepared to stay there until Jimmy woke up. He looked very tired. Last night's adventure, following his agitation in the last weeks, put a heavy toll on his body. Nevertheless, he was happy to see the child alive. Deep inside, he was also hoping that the strange form of matter which he encountered last night did not completely disappear in space. Jimmy's father arrived shortly after. He was surprised to see the professor there. Finally, Jimmy opened his eyes, which instantly filled with tears. He felt a mix of joy at seeing his father and Professor Hopf, but also sadness at not seeing Celeste around for the first time since they had met. Everyone was very emotional. Jimmy, what happened? Asked his father. He shouldn't speak now, interrupted the doctor. He received a severe electrical shock. Luckily, none of his vital organs were affected, and his brain should recover soon, but he needs to rest for a while. I think I can explain, said Professor Hopf, not very convinced. All the data he had analyzed last night was lost, and he could tell from Jimmy's eyes that there was no sign of Celeste floating nearby. Let's go get coffee in the cafeteria while Jimmy goes back to sleep, proposed the professor, heading out of the room. I found in Jimmy a very bright student, extremely passionate about astronomy, started the professor. I can see that, replied the father. He scares me sometimes with stories or explanations that I can't follow. See, Professor, I'm a simple plumber. I work hard to make up for his lost mother, but sometimes, like last night, I get the feeling that I'm failing to do so. You shouldn't worry too much, Professor Hopf comforted the father. Jimmy had the fortune to encounter an exotic form of matter. We both tried to experiment with it last night, but it seems that the matter messed up the power grid and the ball lightning produced hit Jimmy, continued the professor, leaving out some details that would have only confused Jimmy's father. I have my share of guilt in the situation. Last night, I was so excited about the strange signals that I was receiving from space that I failed to correctly respond to Jimmy's presence in the lab so late. Don't be so hard on yourself, said Jimmy's father. Without you, he might not have been found. I heard that you brought him in your arms. I'm very grateful. The two men, although different in nature, seems to have forged a bond and promised to meet again under happier circumstances. Professor Hopf finally went home, giving Jimmy's father some privacy to watch over his peacefully sleeping son. Even though Jimmy was unconscious, his father decided to read him a few pages from his favorite book. Come evening, Jimmy's father sat in the dark for a while, prepared to stay the night. But when the nurse kindly suggested that it would be better if he went home, the father kissed his son on the forehead and quietly left the room. Jimmy felt the soft touch and, after a while, he realized that he was alone in the room. He slowly got out of bed. His head was very heavy and his balance was shaky, but he managed to cross the dark room to the window. The sky was crystal clear and the moon looked bigger than usual. All the main constellations were there, but he was only interested in one, Aquila. Nothing unusual could be seen in that direction with the naked eye. Nothing resembling Celeste could be spotted. Jimmy stared at the sky for more than 1 hour before he got tired. While he was dawdling back to bed, he suddenly heard a high-pitched vibration coming from the window. He turned around and saw a very small sparkling blue ball bouncing shakily towards the window. Jimmy jumped to the window and put his hands on the glass. Celeste approached and gently covered Jimmy's hand in multicolored layers of sparks. He had almost lost all of his body in the battle, but he did not lose his shine and his dedication to Jimmy.